So I'm now 6 months into the new role as Chief Data Officer at Ofcom, and I think when I look at what the biggest challenges that have been faced, it's an interesting area. So I think there's two parts to it. One is how are we scaling up to really meet the demand and the changes in the regulatory areas. So as we're increasing the number of companies that we regulate, how do we enable the team to really focus on delivering data products that support colleagues across the business? And the second is then saying, how do we really start to make sure that Ofcom is able to use data as effectively, safely, efficiently as possible so that we can make data-driven decisions. When we're looking at that first part and saying, how do we scale up the business? Part of this is then changing the focus from what has been in the past a very data innovation driven, like using pilots to be able to change a culture, to actually saying, how do we develop products that deliver value into the business, and trying to understand the value in a business that is a regulator is a lot harder than my experience where I've worked in financial services and everything was able to be related back to a profitability number or a risk reduction or a cost reduction number. So trying to find that value use case is probably the hardest challenge that I've had coming into a new business. In terms of some of the biggest surprises, the pleasant surprise I've had, I think for me it's really the Ofcom is a great place to work with some really good people who are technically some of the best I've ever worked with. So really intelligent people working at the forefront of machine learning and technology, and being in a company where we're really pushing the boundaries on our understanding of these technologies is great for me. And it was a big surprise to see that that was already in place in Ofcom. So thinking about Ofcom's current data maturity, I think we're in a place where data and information has always been the bread and butter for Ofcom in its decision-making process. So we're quite advanced in terms of saying how data is used within the business. But as I or as I look at the future trajectory, I think there's a lot more work that we can do. And this is where I'm looking to build our data strategy. And parts of that will be saying, how do we train people up so there's a common data literacy across the organization so people know how to use data and how to question data more effectively. There's questions about how we can make sure that processes are as simplified as they possibly can be, and that includes the governance as well, to make sure that it's a really effective brake, which means that people are able to drive faster, if we're thinking in a motorsports kind of way. So not something that slows people down, but enables us to move faster. And that's where I want our governance process to be. And then looking at our ICT platforms as we have moved onto cloud, how do we set up that into a place where we have common data stores and assets that can be reused? So I think we've come a long way. There's the culture of using data that's already in place, but there's the next step, which is to say, how do we make sure this culture isn't just to use data, but to use it as effectively as we possibly can, and that there's the people are able to use it easily. Thinking about the country more broadly, I think Ofcom plays a really important role in how we can make communications work for everyone. That's our purpose for being. And data is at the heart of a lot of the areas that we regulate and how we make sure that communications can work. That's everything from our public sector broadcast through to the licenses for radio spectrum and everything from telecommunications, broadband, mobile. So all of these areas are really important for us to be able to communicate. We've seen more and more as we move through the pandemic about how communications is affecting or impacting people's lives, enabling us to do business at home, to work remotely. That's so important. Alongside that, there's the work that the online safety bill is now picking up to make sure that children can live a safe life online, that there's not the illegal material online, and how we can actually work with platforms to make sure that that material isn't being shared that might impact on people's lives. All of that is then enabled through the data and analytics that we look to use. That helps to drive a better country more broadly. But then there's the point of the data, I think, in terms of how we can support some of our data communities. And I'm in a position where, looking forward, we want to make sure that the data that we use within Ofcom is also used in an open data way so that people can access the data that we use, and also moving to an open code platform where the code that we use is able to be shared. And hopefully this puts us into a position where researchers, people are looking to use data and make informed decisions based on data that government and arm's length bodies hold is able to be used more effectively. We're in the process of writing our data strategy. So there was one that was written in 2019, and we're now looking at the refresh and the next part of the journey. And this can be summarized in 4 key pillars that say how we enable Ofcom to use data in the best way possible. So the pillars are around data culture, data excellence, data delivery, and data platforms. In data culture, we're trying to say, how do we enable our people and the data profession to be upskilled to use data as effectively as we can? So that's things around the data literacy that we want everyone in the organisation to use, but then also thinking about the data profession and the learning and development, the career development, the coaching, mentoring that we can provide to build up a successful career journey for everyone. Data excellence is then looking at that end-to-end governance piece, from everything from data privacy, data ethics, but also the quality assurance and the model monitoring and validation that comes in. So how do we make sure that that entire process is as easy and as efficient as possible to enable people to use data safely? Under data delivery, then looking at the workflow model to make sure that everyone across Ofcom is talking a common language when it comes to data, and saying, how do we actually move from the proof of concepts of pilots to say, how do we have a coherent delivery model to get data products into the business? And the last area is looking at the data platform. So what's the IT setup that we require to be that cloud first company where we're able to make decisions with the data on the cloud platform? So that's the 4 key pillars. In terms of the challenges, I think this is understanding that Ofcom's grown in an organic way. So currently there's a lot of data being done in different parts of the business, and we're really reaching an inflection point where we say, how do we enable those parts of the businesses that are using data already effectively to be able to ensure we can then scale them up to deliver data products from the central team so that they can use that within their own regulated areas to be able to make decisions based on data. And it's really trying to make sure that the journey that we've started to deliver a data culture continues to grow into that place where data is used everywhere in our decision-making processes. Looking forward to the rest of 2023, I think there's a huge growth in data use and machine learning. So we've seen Chat GPT, I think, is now one of the fastest growing apps, web apps that's being used, using the large language models. And they're now seeing then other companies looking to push out their own versions of large language models. Alongside that, there's a number of different systems where machine learning has been built into various different applications, and I think we're getting to a point where there's going to be more and more rollout of these of machine learning data capabilities across society. The bits that I'm then looking at is then saying, how does that actually have an impact on society, and where's that going to grow into the future, and how do we continue to use that in the best way possible for our decision making processes? And I know that's something that we're trying to grow in Ofcom. But to be able to do that, I think we need to then grow a common literacy, a common education around data. So looking forward to 2023 and probably beyond, I think we're going to see a lot more education, knowledge and growth that people will have around both these techniques that are being pushed out, but then also where some of the pitfalls for machine learning might be. And I think that'll be really important for society to learn how to capitalize on the opportunities from machine learning, but then also understand where the risks are and how we can mitigate those risks. Thinking about unstructured data, Ofcom uses a huge amount of it, and I'm sure a lot of public sector organisations will be in a similar position. We've got a lot of document information that's stored. We're also looking at policies and codes that will come in, which is, I guess, semi-structured in its nature. But we're also then looking at things like video, audio, and the analytics that we can provide around that. As we move to how we can work with that in the best way, I think parts of it are to say, how do we organize that data effectively, enabling us to capture the provenance of the data lineage, so how decisions have been made, how features have been extracted, which includes then saying, how do we set up that metadata around the unstructured data so it can then be searched and referenced back from features generated. So I think one of the key pieces of advice I'd have very early on is not just saying what's your data store, so your data lake, your lake house to be able to store the unstructured data, but then also the parts that come around that in terms of how do you extract the features from that data and making sure you've got clear data dictionaries and data lineage mechanisms there to be able to extract the maximum value from that. And I think part of that for me is then saying, how do you have effective data management setup? Beyond that, it's then saying, how do you then look to extract data specifically from that, whether that's natural language processing, the large language models that we're seeing coming out of some of the text recognition, through to transcription, translation that we're using effectively to be able to help some parts of our business. So there's those parts of the advanced analytics suite which will be able to generate features which can be tied back to the underlying source of the data to be able to support further analytics. So I think there's two parts to it, which is really effective data management, effective data storage, and beyond that, using advanced analytics to be able to generate features based on the underlying unstructured data. We're currently waiting for the government's AI white paper, which we understand will be published shortly. As they set out in their policy paper last year, we understand that they are likely to take a principles-based approach to AI regulation in the UK, which may look somewhat different from the EU's approach. Whilst we aren't sure of the details, we have a course of shared views with government on our views on how a more principles-based approach could coexist with an existing statutory duties. We'll continue to work with them on our Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum partners to ensure the success of any regime once it's established. So to delve into that a little bit more, the DRCF, the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, is a group of the Ofcom, the FCA, the ICO and CMA all working together around digital regulation, how we can share some of the views. So a lot of the work that we're doing where we're working to understand this is being driven from the DRCF, and definitely will be working with them when it comes to the future of AI.